Good morning, everybody. My name is Suzanne Walker, and I am the supervisor for the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We're really pleased to have Leigh Johnson here with us today to talk about using newspapers in your genealogy research. I'm going to start off the webinar with a few announcements. This webinar is provided as part of the Library Trends it's part of the Indiana State Library Services series. To register for other webinars available for this series or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at library.in.gov under Services for Libraries. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, be sure to see our continuing education website. And I do want to let everyone know that we are going to have a whole new slate of webinars for 2018 coming soon. The State Library has many ways we try to stay connected to everybody across the state. I'm sure most of you guys are logged into Wednesday Word. We, of course, also have our blog. I also want to let everybody know, if you have sound issues during the webinar, please see the sound issues box that's just below your chat box. And if we have a global sound issue, we will announce it. If you're unable to resolve your issue, we are recording the meeting. You can certainly watch it offline later. And at this time, we do not have a global sound issue, so we think our sound is good today. Today's webinar is going to be archived and available to access and share on our archive trainings page. I also do have your LEU. It's going to be available for download at the end of the webinar. Also today, Leigh is going to do her presentation, and then we'll do questions at the end. You can go ahead and type your questions in the chat box as you're going, and I'm going to make note of those, and then we will deliver those all to Leigh at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Leigh, and we're going to get started talking about using newspapers in your family history research.
Thank you, Suzanne. As Suzanne said, I'm Leigh Johnson. I work here at the Indiana State Library. I'm the newspaper librarian, and today we'll be speaking about using newspapers in your family history research. There are several ways that we typically use newspapers in our research.
Hold on. Sorry, we're having just a little snafu here. Leanne's just having a hard time getting to her next slide. Let's see what we're doing. There we go.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Here are the most typical uses that we usually think of when we use newspapers in research. To find obituaries and death notices, looking for articles maybe regarding our relatives, and vital records columns like birth, death, marriage, burial records, etc. But here are some additional uses that we maybe haven't thought of before. Looking for anniversary announcements, wedding announcements, engagements, legal notices, a lot of times help out with genealogy, society columns, local news, photographs, articles related to current local and national events, and advertisements for stores or businesses. Here's an example of some kind of surprising finds, a couple of things. This is from the Greentown Gym, and it's from April 27th, 1933. This is from Howard County. This is the Greentown High School graduating class, and it lists all of their names and gives their pictures. This happens to have been scanned into Indiana Memory, which is a portal to many online digital collections from around Indiana. You may know a little bit about Indiana Memory. We'll talk about that in a few minutes a little bit further, but this would be great if you were looking for this specific group of people. But it's just an example of some of the surprising things you might find in a newspaper. Here we have also from the Greentown Gym. This is from 1931. This is a golden wedding anniversary. announcement. And this couple, this long article lists all of the names of their children and grandchildren and where they live. So this would be just a gold mine if this couple was some relative of yours, and it would be very useful for you. Here's an example of a local news column from the Bloomington Telephone from 1889. Just in this small snippet of an article, we have hospital news, people going in or out of the hospital, people visiting relatives or going out of town to visit relatives, people with new babies, people with new jobs. So you can get a lot of information out of these local news articles. These two advertisements for local businesses are from the Greencastle Herald Democrat from August 19th, 1921. Both of these ads list the name of the proprietors of the businesses, so that could be of great value to your research. You could then take this information and look in city directories to get more specific information about where the businesses were located, and other information. So this could also be of help to your research. This is part of a large article from the Indianapolis News, October 10th, 1918. This is regarding the spread of influenza throughout Indiana. The article highlights several cities and actions being taken to avoid the spread of the disease. So when we look at local columns like this, statewide news, we're getting a sense of the time period, and so that's how these kind of articles can help us with our research. This is an example of a society column from the Richmond Palladium and Sun Telegram for September 27th, 1921. In this column are announcements of parties, weddings, all things that are taking place, recent reports of people visiting other people from out of town, people coming into town to visit, people with new babies. There's also a mention in this article of a memorial service that will be taking place and the pertinent details for attending. So in a way, this is a bit of a kind of catch-all article for local news. So it could be very useful. Obituaries and death notices. There are slight differences between death notices and obituaries. Usually obituaries didn't appear the way we think of them now, not often before the 1920s. And I say that there are many exceptions to this. It's just in general, around 1900 is when you start seeing the longer articles that we think of today. There are exceptions. Here is one from the Locomotive, which is an Indianapolis paper from August 25th, 1849. We have births, deaths, and some like further information about the deaths. A couple of like almost obituary length from 1849. So this is definitely an exception to what we usually find in newspapers, but they do exist. So it's always good to ask or to look in different papers, earlier papers. A potential challenge is finding a death listing in a weekly paper. If the person died right after the latest edition of the paper was issued, they may not be listed in the next week's edition due to other news kind of overshadowing their death. But if the person for whom you're searching was a prominent citizen of the area, there may be an article. Here is an example from the Jasper Courier from January 13th, 1922. This entire article, I couldn't include it all because it was very long. It was 2 columns long. Because Mike Sweeney had been a state senator, he was given a large obituary in the newspaper. Unfortunately, there were no other deaths mentioned in that week's paper or the next week's edition of the same paper in the Jasper area. So I guess, unfortunately, only the prominent citizens got a good obituary in this paper at the time. So always keep that in mind. Sometimes it does have to do with who you are and your family. So just know that not everybody has an obituary, but hopefully your people do. An example of a later newspaper, we've here at the Indiana State Library made a database from the Indianapolis Commercial death listings. The Indianapolis Commercial was a business newspaper, but it did have a death column, and we've gone ahead and indexed this through years and years of work to do that. This kind of is helpful looking for obituaries in other newspapers from Indianapolis. So in other words, we have the person's name, their age, and the date that this column appeared in the newspaper. That is not the date of death, but the date that it appeared. So what you would do with this information is then go to a different newspaper like the Indianapolis Times, the News, or the Star, and look for an actual obituary. All you would find if you looked in the Indianapolis Commercial is the same exact information in a column format. So this is the key to go and look around the date of May 3rd, 1935. So before and after that date to try to find a more detailed death notice or obituary. We started this online index with the 1930s since we already have a print death index for Indianapolis from 1882 to 1930 in our collection. That's the WPA Index to Deaths for Marion County. And that's available down in our genealogy division in print format. And so we didn't go ahead and re-index those that are listed in the WPA. We started with the 1930s. This goes about to 1965, 1970, I believe. So this is available through our website. Now, if you don't have a death date, you have a few options. The Social Security Death Index, it says 1935 to 2014. Those are the years that Social Security basically started, but the Death Index really indexes deaths about 1965 through 2014. So you can use this to find at least usually the month and year of death, if not the date. And this is available through Ancestry Library Edition, or if you subscribe to Ancestry.com. Findagrave.com, lots of times that comes up through Ancestry as well, but you can go to findagrave.com for free without a subscription to Ancestry. And lots of times it will give you photos of gravestones, and you might actually see the death date on the gravestone. So and also sometimes people scan in whole obituaries, and that is just a one-stop shop. So always check that if you're unsure of the death date. Sometimes an internet search, just a Google search, leads to citations in newspapers or actual obituaries. So all of those things can sometimes help with finding an exact date of death. The State Library has a large photo collection. Many of these are from the Indianapolis Star and the Indianapolis News. Access to the collection is available in the research room of the manuscript and rare books section of the library. They have a card file in the actual reading room to both the images and to the manuscripts collections that we have. The bulk of the picture collection is arranged by subject or geographic area, and you can see a list of the headings. The larger collections of photographs are donated. Sometimes if they're donated by a particular family, they're maintained in separate collections. So inventories of many of these are on our website. Some of the photos are also scanned into Indiana Memory, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. This is the page of the Rare Books and Manuscripts collection that shows their research tools. If you scroll down on this page, I've circled the research tools. That will take you to where it says collection guides. The photograph collection is where you would want to click to see what's offered. And most of those are listed, but the ones that are scanned into Indiana Memory will be available through this page. This is Indiana Memory is a digital consortium for Indiana libraries. Some of your libraries may contribute to that. It's an ongoing project that involves integrating digital projects throughout Indiana and hosting them through this website, through the State Library. So this Indiana Memory page is available from our website. Over the years, we've created many online databases in-house, which means that you can access them from any computer for free. Among those is the Indianapolis Newspaper Index, and it's just for Indianapolis papers 1848 to about 1991. This is available online, and we actually still have the card catalog, and it's still in use, very much in use, because the cross-referencing is very good on that, and so we use that a lot. But it is available through our website, as is the Indiana Biography Index, and it's about the same years as the Newspaper Index. And Biography Index is available in card form or on our website. The Indianapolis Commercial Death Index, as we've already talked about, is available. And then there are a few from Logansport, New Albany, Vincennes, just various dates. We have an Indiana Marriage database, 1958 to 2015, and a Cemetery Locator Index, which just basically tells where the cemeteries are located and what materials we have that list transcriptions. And those are mainly stored in the genealogy collection. We subscribe to several databases. I'm just going to highlight a few here. And these have to be used within the state library in order to use our subscription. Ancestry Library Edition is the Library and Historical Society version of Ancestry.com. It has, I think, all the same features except for maybe the family trees could be a little different. But you can still search the same databases. We have a cool website, Genealogist Newspaper Search, that searches about 5 states' newspapers. American Ancestors used to be called New England Ancestors, so if you have New England Ancestors, you might want to try that database. Heritage Quest is mainly just online books now. They have census records and things that are also on Ancestry. Newspaper Archive is a great digital newspaper database that I use a lot. We now subscribe to the ProQuest Indianapolis Star 1903 to the present, so that's a wonderful addition to our databases that we've just added in the past couple of months. We also have Fold3, which I don't use a whole lot as a newspaper librarian, but I've been told it's very helpful for genealogy. And newspapers.com, which of course is a digital newspaper database that we have access to. Then, of course, we link on our website to databases from other libraries that other libraries and historical societies have created. If you go to genealogy databases, indexes, and resources by county, this is just an example of a few things that are offered by Vigo County. They have this wonderful database of obituaries, the Wabash Valley Obituary Index. They have a cemetery database. They have some marriage databases and a military index. And this is just a small example of what they've done through their library. So we try to link to all the other county offerings through our website. And if you notice that we've forgotten something or need to add something, please let us know and we can do that. Additional resources that I think are useful, especially this first one, the Indiana Newspaper Bibliography by John W. Miller. This is basically a book that I use every day. It is basically a listing of all the Indiana newspapers that have ever existed by county, and it lists the holdings of libraries and historical societies, recorders' offices, newspaper offices, all throughout the state. The unfortunate thing about it, the only drawback, is that it was done in, I think, 1982. So this is unfortunately, the most up-to-date listing we have not a lot has changed as far as the holdings, except for a lot of things have been microfilmed that were in original format. So probably we have more now than was ever listed on that here at the State Library, but other places may or may not have the same things as they had in 1982. But it's still a very, very good reference. The Indiana Biography Index, I think, is very helpful on through our website or in the card catalog. If you come to the library, can really help with finding information. Our newspaper index, of course, on the website or in the card catalog. And the genealogy division has a number of Indiana County newspaper indexes within their county collections down in the genealogy section on the first floor. So if you're here, you might want to look in those indexes before you come upstairs and look at the microfilm of newspapers. Inspire is a free set of databases that's provided by the state to Indiana residents. Your IP address has to be within Indiana in order to access Inspire. But if you can, there are several newspaper databases that can be accessed through Inspire that I'd like to tell you about and highlight a little bit. Let's look at the page that comes up when you click on databases by subject. So if you click on the box that has Inspire at the bottom, you'll be taken to this page. And then if you go to the advanced search underneath the search box, it'll show you the databases by subject. And in the middle is the news and history.
Sorry, Leon. Can you go back one slide? I think if you hit advanced search, you're going to get the advanced search for Inspire. So I think you want to go.
Oh, I meant.
That's okay. Yep.
Yes,
I think you
you're
want to
right.
go just below it.
To the database by subject. Yep. I'm sorry,
That's
Suzanne.
okay. No problem.
Okay, I've changed some of these
That's okay.
slides. You're right. If you go to databases by subject,
then you'll get
this page.
Very good.
And some of the highlights of the things that are on this this Inspire page. The McClatchy Tribune collection is a 90-day archive. So this is more recent issues of 100 national newspapers. So, and some of these are major newspapers. I am not sure about the Indiana connection to this one, but with Newspaper Source, which is right underneath it, is select coverage of about 10 Indiana papers and 389 U.S. newspapers. So, yeah, I know not everybody's going to have Indiana ancestors. We all have people from all over. So these two databases may be of use to you for people not necessarily from Indiana. We also have Hoosier State Chronicles, which is a database digitized here at the State Library. It's available through Inspire, and it's also available just through our website. You can go directly to it. It has OCR capabilities, which means that it's searchable, and it now includes the Indianapolis News 1869 to 1920, which is pretty exciting. You can also get to this, like I said, through our website. At the bottom of the page there, it's one of the boxes on the right-hand side. And this is their title page. Hoosier State Chronicles is part of a federal grant program that the State Library has received for several years. And the grant was organized in to digitize Indiana newspapers specifically. And we have right now a really impressive collection of newspaper titles. The only disadvantage is with the dates. The papers have to be out of copyright. So for many titles, the latest dates are from 1923. There are some later papers, but usually these are short runs of papers or defunct newspapers that don't have copyright issues. As you can see from this list, this is just the top of the page of the titles that are available through Indiana Hoosier State Chronicles, and they're adding more every day. I'm going to do a little search here just to show you some of the ways we can use Hoosier State Chronicles. I hope this works.
Try one more time. Let's see. Let's try this. And then hit your internet down. There we go.
There we go.
Yep.
All right. So if you go to search, I'm going to do an advanced search. You can search all the publications that are included in Hoosier State Chronicles, or you can limit it to a single publication. You can search from month and day, year to another year. But if you just do, let's just do, it'd be helpful if I could type Eli Lilly, see what comes up. Okay, well, we get 5,319 results. But we can come over here and limit our search to certain publications. It's listed in the news 1,500 times, his name. We can choose decades. We can, obviously, way more decades we can add. We can choose a tag. We can choose a word count of the article. But the most relevant results will come up at the top, Indianapolis Recorder, and it even gives you a little snippet of, this is obviously an advertisement. So you can kind of tell what it's going to be about just by looking at the little snippet at the bottom here. So it's kind of really cool that you can search a bunch of different publications, a bunch of different years, and then further limit it over here on the left-hand side. So Hoosier State Chronicles, in my opinion, is just the best digital database. You can do this from any computer. It's free. So make sure you take advantage of that. Okay. Okay, well, if you can't visit the library, what can you do to obtain newspaper articles? And, a lot of our materials are still on microfilm, and you have a few options other than coming down here and getting parking and all that. You can request articles through our Ask a Librarian service. All we really need is the name of the person that you're looking for. It could be an obituary, but it could also be an article, title of the article, or whatever, like subject matter, date of death, or date the obit or the article appeared in the newspaper, the city and title of the newspaper of which you would like us to check. You'd be surprised how many times people just want us to check random Indianapolis newspapers, and there's so many, so a title would be helpful. There is a flat fee of $5 per name for obituaries, 1 to 10 pages for $5 for other types of articles, and each additional page after 10 is 50 cents a page. We can email the articles to you. We can scan them and email them through our microfilm scanners. We can also photocopy and mail them through regular mail with an invoice. We can send the invoice by email. You can pay by check or credit card for a small fee. So we can do just about anything. We're pretty flexible with that. What we do ask that you give us a pretty exact date. That really helps. Our Ask a Librarian service is pretty easy to get to from our homepage. It's right under the pretty pictures of the library with the unnaturally blue sky. Ask a Librarian down at the bottom underneath. If you click on, okay, I guess I took out some slides that showed what you get, but when you click on Ask a Librarian, you get two options, either a chat question or submitting an online form. I would suggest, if you're going to ask for anything other than, I would say a genealogy question in general is going to be the online form. Chat doesn't work very well for genealogy questions. We just can't always do that while we're on reference desk. So it's easier. We can get back to you within 2 business days usually. And we'll usually let you know if we're working on something that's taking a little longer than 2 business days. But we try to get back to you and give you feedback that we received your question. So if you have any questions about using an Ask a Librarian, you feel free to ask me at the end here. Also, we can do interlibrary loan through your local public or academic library. We can loan up to 5 reels of newspaper microfilm for up to 6 weeks at a time. And now the 5 reels, if somebody else is also from your public library loaning from us, that is included in the 5 reels. So it's 5 reels to the library. We do have some film that does not go out on an interlibrary loan, mostly county collections, and some film that we don't have microfilm masters or access to microfilm masters for. But for the large part, we do loan most of the film. It's arranged by and delivered to your local public library or academic library, and it will stay there. You have to go to your library to use it. This service is free for the library patrons. So as long as your library has a machine to look at the microfilm on, then you should be good to do interlibrary loan. Now, if you do come to the library, our newspapers are arranged in holdings guides. We have them available online and also in some really high-tech binders down at the second floor information desk. You can look those up by county, but the newspapers on film themselves are filed by city, and they're A to Z except for Indianapolis, and they're sort of in their own, it's in its special area, but everything else is A to Z by city. County collections are filed under the county seat. So for example, Hendricks County collection films will be filed under Danville. So you do kind of have to know the county seat, but I have a cheat sheet down there in case you don't remember. We do have original print newspapers, and we are able to pull those if the microfilm is not available or if there isn't microfilm available for use for that newspaper. We appreciate if you can give us a little heads up that you're coming and wanting to look at originals, because there are about 3 places in the building that these can be located, so it can be hard to find, but we can do that. Our online holdings guides, I'm going to try to show you. Hopefully it'll go to the link, but it may not.
It will.
Oh,
there we go.
There it is, maybe. There we go. Okay, these are our holdings guides by county. Obviously, you can see, let me just click on one, and I can show you. It tells the title, the city, where you're going to find the microfilm, and a summary of the film, like if it's a collection film. I've tried to include the dates. Some, you're going to get some scattered issues, especially really early newspapers. It's going to be very scattered. So we've tried to make it as organized as possible. Coming soon, hopefully very soon, we'll have a database where you can just type in the year you're looking for, the city, or the newspaper title, and it should come up what we've got. So hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. That will be coming, but right now we just have the sophisticated binder system and the online system. If you are able to come into the library, ISL has 4 different types of microfilm readers and scanners. Most of them do digital scans. They all do really, but some of them we know how to use better than others, and the software is easier to use. So we can kind of help you use those. We have written out user guides for each of them. You can save scans onto a flash drive for free, or you can print out your findings for 25 cents per page. We have printers hooked to each one of those. But it's really best if you can bring a flash drive and save them, because at no charge you can save a lot of scans. We can always, librarians are always on duty to help you in that area of the library. We know it's not a real intuitive process to use microfilm, but once you've done it a couple of times, it can be really easy to use.
Leanne,
yes.
Do you know how many scanners we have? We have a lot, right?
I think we have about 25.
Okay.
And they're all a little bit
They're all
There's
different.
4 different types, and they've all got their little quirks.
Okay.
Yep. Here are our hours, and you can see that we are open a little bit later on Thursday nights. That's our evening that we're open. We're open Saturdays 10 to 4, but make sure you check our website for closing information. We're closed on all state holidays and most federal holidays. So make sure you check just our website. Usually they'll put a banner ad if we're going to be closed anytime coming up, and just make note of that before you drive down.
And I think Connie Bruder is probably typing this in the chat box, but there is a change coming to our Saturday hours so that we won't be open every Saturday. So that's another thing to check too.
And that's coming in early 2018.
Yeah.
So make sure you check before you come down to the library. Okay, if we have some time, we could take some questions.
Great. Okay, cool. So if everyone wants to go ahead and type your questions into the chat box, that would be great. I have a few that I've gotten written down here as we've been going. So first of all, this is sort of going back to your presentation, but I know that, for example, in Indianapolis, we have our current newspapers. You know, everybody knows the Indianapolis Star. How do you find the old newspapers that are no longer published anymore? Is there a good, I mean, I know all of your resources that you shared, but if you don't know the name of the newspaper, is there a place to just find where the old newspapers are, or is the best place just to go to that index that you showed us on the website?
Probably yes. That's the best place to go, because if you go to the Marion County Holdings Guide, it's going to show you the earliest dates and the title of the paper, and if there's any gaps in that in the holdings. The other good resource is that John W. Miller book, the Indiana Newspaper Bibliography. That is organized also by county, but also within that by city. And so I think he even divides up Beech Grove, Speedway, Lawrence, you know, any of the towns within Marion County that kind of have their own neighborhood newspaper or whatnot. So those are good resources. Usually you can also use, if you're here in the library, you can also use the Indianapolis Star Index to kind of see what dates you need, and then go to the Holdings Guide and see if we have any other papers for the dates.
Sarah Kirby also mentions that for non-Indiana, either Chronicling America at the Library of Congress or online newspapers site maybe is another good one. I don't know if you're familiar with either of those.
No.
Okay, so thanks,
But
Sarah.
newspapers.com, Newspaper Archive, yeah, there probably are some other states that have, you know, something like Hoosier State Chronicles.
Well, and that actually leads me to my next question, which was, I know that a lot of times genealogy research takes you through different states. And I know my husband's been working on ours, and he's up in Michigan now. Well, not literally, but his research has taken him up to Michigan. And there's this one OBIT that he really needs to get. So I know that he's been looking at Michigan State Library. And is it your experience that other states have similar databases and indexes like we do?
I think some do and some don't.
Yeah.
Michigan is, their state library has, I think, been helpful to a lot of researchers. It just depends on the state and how their archives and library are organized, where their genealogy information is and is kept. And you may have to do a little bit of internet searching to find the source for newspapers.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if there's newspapers that have been going throughout the time period that he needs, he might be able to contact the current newspaper if they're still in business, or...
He's also thinking of just going there.
Well, yeah, that's another good thing to do.
Yeah, just to try. You mentioned a few card catalogs here at the State Library.
Oh, yeah.
I was just wondering if those are still being kept up to date.
They are not, but What we have, it's very well cross-indexed. The librarians of the past really, really worked hard to get these cards as accurate as possible. And so when we put the information in the database, we refer to the cards and try to get all that information in. But sometimes you just can't quite get it as well cross-referenced. So we keep those not only just for the fact of nostalgia, but also because they're really useful to go back and refer to.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, again, has another comment. She says that lots of states do have a digital program, but the same 1923 limitation as we work with. She says that there are few online indexes in her experiences, and then she did mention some sites earlier that might help people find what does exist. And she also says not to forget to look at the local library for that location, which I think is really smart.
Right, right.
You know.
And we do link to, the ones in Indiana for sure. There is a page, I believe the genealogy collection keeps it up, but of out-of-state links and things, that other states offer, national links, military. It's by subject and then also, I think, by state.
Right.
So they keep that page up, and, you might be able to get newspaper information from some of those same sources.
Well, and I imagine if you know, like, the town that you're researching, if you just give a call to the public library and see if you can get a hold of someone who is in charge of their local collections, they might be able to tell you, like, the names of
definitely.
the older newspapers.
The local history, a lot of the libraries have a local history room or an Indiana room or
a heritage room.
Yeah,
they have lots of different names. We do have another question that came in through the chat. Are our newspapers digitized and indexed at this time? So the answer to that is sort of like a little bit.
Some are, most are not. I estimate that we have about 100,000 reels of microfilm downstairs. And of those, what's digitized is basically what's in Hoosier State Chronicles for what we have digitized. And then, whatever's on the databases like newspapers.com and Newspaper Archive, some of those same newspapers that we have downstairs on microfilm have been digitized. But I would say the largest percentage has not been.
And then our plans for getting those digitized, is that through Hoosier State Chronicles or Indiana Memory or both?
Kind of both. We do have sort of a deal with newspapers.com.
Right.
We've done some digitizing with them. We may do more in the future. It's all still kind of up in the air. Obviously, it's my hope that the more digital access we have, the better, because, it's just so much easier for people to use the databases than it is to drive down here and get parking, etc.
Although I will say parking downtown is not as bad as people think, I think.
Maybe I've been saying.
We do have a lot of street parking that you can pay for with a credit card, which is nice. And I always tell people the trick that you can always come to the State Library and have lunch at the Historical Society, which is across the street. And if you do that, and you can get free parking in their lot. We have a couple other questions coming in. I also wanted to mention about access to Inspire, that if you are in Indiana and your IP address does not get recognized, you can always follow the prompts to register for a user account. So I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with doing that. I see a couple other people are still typing. Please go ahead and continue putting your questions in. We did have a question that came in that pretty much got answered, but I'll go ahead and mention it to you. You mentioned the $5 fee for getting an OBIT.
Yes.
Is that waived if you're a library asking?
Yes, usually.
But if you're a library that's asking for a patron, is it still waived or not really?
You should probably have the patron submit the question, simply because it's like the telephone game. Sometimes the information gets passed down and it's not quite accurate. It's best if the patron puts the Ask a Librarian question, if at all possible.
And
I understand
they pay the
if
$5
they cannot, then if it's a situation where the library just wants to do that for them, then that is fine too. We can do either way. I don't think it's not about getting the money. It's just the effort that, looking for it and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, if the library wants to represent the patron, that's fine.
We did have a question kind of about the organization here at the State Library. At our library, is there a genealogy department and a newspaper department? Can you sort of describe how
Here?
how you as the newspaper librarian fit in?
Well, I work for the Indiana division, and there are 5 librarians in the Indiana division, and they all have their subject specialties. Mine is newspapers. And then we have a separate genealogy division, which is on a different floor of the library, and they have 5 or 6 librarians as well. So when you send in and ask a librarian question, that will get assigned to a librarian. However, usually they assign those, the supervisors assign those according to the subject matter and who would be the best person to answer that question. So that's how those get divided.
And in the Indiana division, you mentioned that your subject specialty is newspapers.
Yes.
Can you tell us a couple of the other subject specialties?
We have a state documents coordinator. We have a digitization specialist, a map librarian.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So yeah, and we all can answer Indiana division related questions, all things Indiana basically. But we have our special collections that we keep track of.
That's great. I had another quick question. Oh, this is sort of housekeeping. Can we get copies of your slides? Can you give those to me so I can
Sure.
share those with people?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I'll have those available for everyone. And then also, you mentioned the Fold3 resource?
Yes.
Do you know what that covers?
It is a lot of, I think it's a lot of military documents and government kind of documents from the past.
Put you
it's
on the
not
spot.
really, I have not used it personally very much at all.
Okay.
I've helped patrons use it, and some of them really like it. It's genealogy related, and so I don't really use it much in my everyday, but I know patrons especially like it for military out of state.
And Sarah's
research.
chiming in again. She says that it started out with all sorts of old stuff, and I think she's going to give us more details. She says when Ancestry bought it, it started focusing on the military. And then Julie has a question. Have we tried out-of-state research? Do you come across restrictions because you're out of state? Does this change if you're a patron or a professional? And I guess what I would say is anytime you're sort of researching farther away from where you are, it does make it a little bit more difficult. But I think that the kinds of services that we offer, like the chat and getting OBITs and things like that, I think lots of state agencies or state libraries will offer that.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of public libraries as well are offering chat and email submissions for questions. And, we really try to partner with libraries that's, as far as Indiana goes, but I would encourage, reaching out to out-of-state libraries and just letting them know, I'm a librarian here in Indiana, and we want to really, know what all you have, and we'll tell you what we have, and so.
That sounds great. Are there any final questions? It looks like we've mostly answered most of the questions that have come in. Well, I just want to thank Leanne so much. I think this was really great.